The front porch light flicked on before I even reached the steps, like someone had been watching through the window. My suitcase wheels rattled against the cracked concrete, the sound too loud in the cold night. 10 hours on a plane. 2 layovers. An airport holiday crowd that smelled like stress and spilled coffee. All of it because my mom had called 3 days ago, crying softly, saying she needed me home for the holidays. I barely had time to straighten up before the door swung open. No smile. No hug. No, you made it. She looked past me, not at me, already stepping back into the house. You'll babysit your brother's kids, she said, like she was reminding me to take the trash out. We're leaving tomorrow morning. For a second I honestly thought jet lag had scrambled my brain. I stood there holding my coat, my suitcase half outside, half inside, waiting for the rest of the sentence. Maybe the joke. Maybe the laugh. Maybe the welcome home that was supposed to come first. It didn't. My brother leaned against the hallway wall behind her, arms crossed, a lazy grin already forming. Hey, he said to his kids loud enough for me to hear, don't wipe your snot on her. She's not a maid, just free childcare. They laughed. All of them. Even my mom smiled like it was harmless, like I was being sensitive. I felt something inside me go very still. I stepped fully into the house, letting the door close behind me. The familiar smell of pine cleaner and cinnamon candles hit my nose, the same scent I remembered from childhood holidays. The house looked exactly the same. The family photos on the wall hadn't changed either. My brother in every frame, front and center. Me if I appeared at all, cropped at the edge. My mom was already walking toward the kitchen. Rules are simple, she said over her shoulder. No leaving the house while we're gone. The kids have school schedules, activities. Cameras are on for safety. Food's in the fridge. You'll manage. I nodded. Not because I agreed. Because something about the way she said no leaving made my skin prickle. On the kitchen counter, right next to a stack of boarding passes and a neatly printed travel itinerary, sat a manila folder. White label. Black ink. My name. I hadn't noticed it at first. But once I did, I couldn't stop looking at it. My brother followed my gaze and casually slid the folder a few inches farther back, like it didn't matter. Like it was nothing. You're an adult, my mom said finally, turning to face me. You're independent. This shouldn't be a big deal. Independent. That word again. I smiled. Fully. Calmly. Of course, I said. I can handle it. My mom visibly relaxed. My brother's grin widened. They thought that was it. Thought I was already boxed in. As my mom turned off the kitchen light, I caught one last glimpse of the folder before the room went dim. That was the moment I realized something important. I hadn't been invited home for the holidays. I had been brought here on purpose. Morning came too fast. I woke up on the old pull-out couch, my back stiff, my phone buzzing on the floor beside me. For a split second I forgot where I was. Then I heard it. The sound of suitcases being dragged across the hallway, the low excitement in my brother's voice, the clink of coffee mugs. They were happy. That should have been my first clue. I walked into the kitchen to find my mom standing over the counter with a clipboard, checking things off like she was running a small operation. Passports. Boarding passes. Envelopes. Everything stacked neatly, already planned. My brother was scrolling on his phone, bragging about seat upgrades and hotel views. You're up, my mom said without looking at me. Good. Let's go over the schedule. She slid a handwritten list toward me. Wake-up times. School drop-offs. Meals. Screen limits. Bedtimes. Emergency numbers. Everyone's except hers. You're not going anywhere while we're gone, she added, finally meeting my eyes. We don't want confusion. Or surprises. No visitors, my brother chimed in. And don't mess with the cameras. They're for the kids. For the kids. I nodded again, the same calm nod as last night. Inside something tightened. Not fear. Awareness. I asked lightly, how long have you had this trip planned? My brother snorted. Forever. Non-refundable too. Cost a fortune. He grinned. Worth it. My mom shot him a look, then turned back to me. It was last minute for you, I know. But family needed you. Family. 3 days ago she'd been crying on the phone, telling me she felt lonely, saying the holidays didn't feel the same without me. She never mentioned flights. Or hotels. Or that they'd already decided to leave the country. As she talked, I noticed how careful she was with her words. Everything was phrased like an assumption, not a request. Like this had already been agreed to somewhere I hadn't been present. While my brother stepped outside to load the car, my mom lowered her voice. "We really appreciate this," she said. "It helps more than you know." Her hand drifted toward the counter and stopped, resting just in front of that manila folder. The same one from last night. Before I could ask about it, her phone rang. She turned away from me, back straight, voice suddenly tense. "Yes, she's here, yes, in the house. Pause. Don't worry. It's handled." Handled. She glanced over her shoulder when she said it, eyes sharp, like she was checking whether I'd heard. I pretended to scroll my phone. But I had heard every word. When she hung up, she smiled again, too quick, too rehearsed. "We're running late," she said. "We'll talk when we get back." As if this was temporary. As if I was just a placeholder. Through the window, I watched their car pull out of the driveway, packed and ready. Only then did I realize the truth settle heavy in my chest. This trip wasn't the plan. The house felt wrong the moment the front door shut. Not quiet, empty. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes every small sound feel watched. The kids dropped their backpacks by the door like they always did, clearly used to this routine. Too used to it. "Can we have snacks?" the youngest asked, already heading toward the pantry. "After homework," I said automatically, surprising myself with how easily the role slipped on. Like muscle memory. Like I'd been trained for this. They groaned but obeyed. That was when I noticed it. None of them asked where their parents were. Not once. Later, as they sat at the table with worksheets spread out, one of them glanced up at me. "Grandma says you always come when she needs you." I paused mid-step. "Does she?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. The kid shrugged. "Yeah. She said you're really reliable. That you don't say no." The words landed heavier than they should have. Not because they were cruel, but because they were said like a fact. Like gravity. Like weather. Another child leaned back in his chair. "Last time she said you might stay longer, but then you left early." My chest tightened. "What do you mean last time?" He frowned, thinking. "Like, before. When they went somewhere and you watched us." I hadn't been home for the holidays in years. "Where did they go?" I asked. "Some beach place," the youngest said. "Grandma said it was important. She told us not to bother you." Important. A few minutes later, while helping with math problems, I noticed something strange sticking out of one child's backpack. A plain white envelope. Bank logo in the corner. "That yours?" I asked, pointing. "No," she said. "It came in the mail yesterday. Grandma opened it." "What did it say?" He shrugged. "Dunno. Grandma got mad and said not to touch it." I stood up slowly and walked to the counter, opening the junk drawer where mail sometimes landed. That's when I saw it. A torn corner of the same envelope stuffed carelessly beneath old batteries and rubber bands. My name was printed on it. Full name. Correct spelling. The kids kept talking behind me, unaware. "Grandma said it was good you came," one said. "She said things were easier when you were here." Easier. I didn't turn around. "Did Grandma say anything else?" I asked quietly. There was a pause. Then the oldest spoke. "She said once you were in the house, everything would be okay." I closed the drawer with shaking hands. Adults lie with intention. Children tell the truth by accident. And in that moment, standing in my childhood kitchen holding a piece of mail I never received, I understood something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't about babysitting. I hadn't been invited. I had been activated. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house finally stopped breathing around me, I sat alone on the edge of the couch and let the memories come. I didn't invite them. They showed up on their own, like they'd been waiting for permission. I remembered being 14, standing in the same kitchen, my mom sliding a stack of bills across the counter toward me. "You're good with money," she'd said. "Just help out a little." I got my first job 2 weeks later. My brother didn't. He never had to. At 16, I paid for my own phone. At 18, my own clothes. At 19, part of the rent. Because family helps family. Every time I hesitated, my mom used the same tone. Calm. Reasonable. Disappointed. Like I was failing a quiet test. My brother, meanwhile, failed loudly and was rewarded for it. He crashed cars and my parents replaced them. He dropped out of classes and they blamed the school. He quit jobs and they called it finding himself. When I succeeded, it was expected. When he survived, it was celebrated. I told myself it didn't hurt. That I was independent, strong, the reliable one. But sitting there in the dark, I realized something sharper. I hadn't been strong. I'd been conditioned. Every crisis trained me. We just need a little help, rewired me. They didn't ask because they trusted me. They asked because I was predictable. Because I'd been taught that saying no meant being selfish, ungrateful, difficult. My phone buzzed softly beside me. A notification from years ago resurfaced in my mind. The time I'd wired money for a temporary emergency that never got repaid. The time my mom had cried about bills, only for my brother to post vacation photos a week later. I'd ignored the pattern because seeing it would have meant admitting the truth. That I was only valuable when I was useful. I stood up and walked to the hallway wall where the family photos hung. I traced the frames with my fingers. Birthday after birthday. Holiday after holiday. My brother's life documented in high resolution. Mine reduced to cropped shoulders and half smiles. I wondered how many times they'd practiced this routine without me knowing. How many times they'd said my name in rooms I wasn't in, deciding what I'd handle next. Back in the kitchen, the manila folder waited where it had been all day. I didn't open it yet. I didn't need to. Because the flashbacks had already done their job. They had connected every dot I'd spent years refusing to draw a line between. This wasn't sudden betrayal. It was the final stage of a system that had been running my entire life. And systems, I knew, don't collapse from emotion. They collapse when someone finally stops playing their assigned role. The next morning, I played the part they expected. I made breakfast. I packed lunches. I answered questions with polite efficiency. To anyone watching the cameras, I was exactly what they wanted. Useful, quiet, compliant. The kind of person you forget to worry about. That was the mistake. While the kids ate cereal, my brother called on speakerphone from the airport lounge, voice loud and careless. "Everything good?" he asked. "No issues." "All good," I said lightly. "Just getting everyone ready." "Perfect," he replied. "Knew we could count on you." "Count on me." In the background, I could hear the echo of the terminal, the hollow sound of announcements bouncing off high ceilings. He sounded relaxed. Victorious. Like someone who thought the hard part was over. He started rambling the way he always did when he felt safe. Complaining about airport lines. Bragging about upgrades. Then he said something that didn't quite fit. "Once this clears," he laughed, "we're finally out of the woods." Clears. I froze for half a second, then forced myself to keep moving. I'd worked long enough in compliance-adjacent roles to know that word didn't belong in casual vacation talk. People didn't say it unless they were waiting on money, approval, or a problem to disappear. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully. "Oh, you know," he said. "Paperwork. Bank nonsense. It's boring." My mom's voice cut in sharply. "That's enough. She doesn't need details." The line went quiet for a beat too long. I smiled at the counter, heart steady. "Hey," I said. "Have a good flight." After I hung up, I stood there listening to the refrigerator hum, replaying his words. Clears. Out of the woods. Paperwork. That afternoon, while the kids were at school, I finally checked my phone properly. Not messages, alerts. The ones most people ignore until it's too late. There was a credit inquiry notification from a lender I'd never used. Time-stamped yesterday. I didn't panic. Panic is loud. Panic makes mistakes. Instead, I sat down and read it twice. Then a third time. Name correct. Social correct. Address current. Authorized inquiry. My pulse slowed. They hadn't just used my presence. They'd used my identity. I thought back to the folder on the counter. The envelope with my name. The phone call where my mom said, "She's here." That wasn't relief. That was confirmation. I realized then why they'd been so confident. Why no one had asked if I wanted to help. Why my brother had sounded so relaxed. They believed I was trapped by habit. By guilt. By silence. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to learn, was that my life away from them had taught me something valuable. I understood systems. And more importantly, I knew exactly how fragile they were once someone started paying attention. By the third day, I understood the house wasn't just a place. It was a container. Every movement echoed through it differently now. The soft click of the hallway camera when it adjusted. The faint whir behind the living room vent. Even the way the doors closed, slow, heavy, final, like they were designed to remind you where you were. I started noticing patterns. The cameras weren't aimed at the kids' rooms. They were aimed at exits. Front door. Back door. Side gate. The one camera that covered the kitchen didn't watch the stove or the sink. It watched the counter. Where the folder had been. Where mail landed. Where decisions were made. They weren't worried about the children. They were worried about me leaving. So I stopped thinking like someone trapped inside a house and started thinking like someone inside a system. I documented everything. Dates. Times. Exact phrasing. I took photos of the itinerary still taped to the fridge. Screenshots of texts that framed demands as assumptions. Video of the camera's red lights blinking on when I walked past certain angles. I even recorded my own voice at night, quietly narrating what had happened that day in case I needed a timeline later. Factual. No emotion. Emotion muddies records. In the kitchen drawer beneath mismatched batteries and bent paper clips I found it. A folded piece of yellow paper. My mom's handwriting. Call bank. Add her as authorized user. Book flights. No dates. No names. Just instructions. Like a recipe. Like this was routine. I stood there longer than I meant to, paper trembling between my fingers. Not because I was shocked, but because everything suddenly made sense. The rush to get me home. The certainty. The way my presence had flipped a switch from anxiety to confidence. They didn't need my permission. They needed my proximity. That night as I tucked the kids into bed, one of them asked, "Are you staying forever?" I smiled. "No," I said gently. "Just for now." In the dark, I opened my laptop and began organizing everything into folders. Evidence. Context. Financial signals. Behavior patterns. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is reactive. This was something else. This was analysis. The house tried to press in on me. Silence. Cameras. Distance from the outside world. But the more they tried to contain me, the clearer my thinking became. They believed the house made me powerless. They believed isolation meant control. What they never understood was this. A closed system is only safe until the person inside it starts mapping the exits. And by the time I shut the laptop and turned off the light, I wasn't wondering if I would leave. I was deciding exactly how much of the structure would still be standing when I did. The fourth night they stopped pretending. My brother called from the resort just after sunset. Video on, camera angled wide enough to show blue water and glowing lights behind him. Laughter spilled through the screen before he even spoke. Music thumped somewhere off camera. Glasses clinked. "You should see this place," he said, grinning. 5 stars. All-inclusive. Kids would have loved it, if they were here. He laughed at his own joke. My mom leaned into the frame, sun-kissed already, hair done, relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Everything okay at home?" she asked, voice light. Not worried. Not grateful. Just checking a box. "All good," I said. "Everyone's on schedule." "See?" my brother said. "Told you she'd handle it." Handle it. They talked over each other then. About spa reservations, boat tours, how exhausted they'd been before the trip and how badly they'd needed this break. My brother bragged about how he'd finally caught a break, how things were lining up. "At this rate," he said, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret, "we're set for years." My mom shot him a look that came too late. "Don't start," she said. "What?" he laughed. "It's basically done." Basically done. I watched their faces carefully. The ease. The certainty. People who believed the hardest part was behind them. People who thought the story had already ended. "By the way," my brother added casually, "which card did you end up using for the booking?" I forgot. My stomach tightened but my face didn't move. "Yours," I said gently. My mom answered at the same time. "Hers." The silence that followed was short, but sharp. Then my brother laughed it off. "Right. Yeah. That's what I meant." My mom smiled too fast. "We'll sort details later." Details. After we hung up, I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the dark window. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Inside, the house hummed with electricity and cameras and borrowed confidence. They were celebrating because they thought they'd already won. They believed distance protected them. That once they were out of the country, nothing could touch them. That whatever they'd done would clear, while I stayed busy, distracted, grateful to be included at all. That night, my mom sent a message that sealed it. "Thanks again for being so understanding. We really couldn't have done this without you." I didn't reply. I set my phone down and opened my notes instead, adding one final line beneath the timeline I'd been building. They're careless now. Careless people leave trails. They talk too much. They stop checking doors. And the most dangerous moment for anyone who's taken advantage of someone else is the moment they start celebrating before the consequences arrive. Because celebrations are loud. And loud things are easy to find. It took one quiet afternoon for the final piece to surface. The kids were at school. The house was still. I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, sunlight cutting across the wood in thin lines, and began pulling threads instead of yanking them. Slow searches. Official portals. Neutral language. The kind of digging that doesn't trigger alarms. That's when I saw it. The charges weren't just on an account. They were because of me. Flights. Hotel deposit. All routed through a credit line tied to my identity. Not my brother's. Not my mother's. I wasn't just an authorized user. I was the qualifier. The stabilizer. The reason the booking went through at all. My hands went cold. The forged authorization wasn't there to give them access later. It was there to stop me from pulling access back. A preemptive muzzle. If I tried to dispute, they'd point to the form and say I consented. That I'd agreed. That this was family. I leaned back in my chair, breathing slowly, and finally allowed myself to name it. This wasn't manipulation. It was fraud with manners. I replayed the timeline in my head. The sudden urgency. The crying phone call. The insistence that I come home now. The cameras. The rules. The way my mom's relief had arrived the second I stepped inside the house. They hadn't needed my help with the kids. They'd needed my presence long enough to anchor the transaction. My phone buzzed. A message from my brother, upbeat and careless. Resort Wi-Fi is terrible. Hope everything's smooth there. Smooth. I typed nothing back. Instead, I opened the folder I'd created and dropped in screenshots. Charge confirmations. Time stamps. The credit inquiry. The note in my mom's handwriting. Each piece clicked into place like a lock turning. And then I understood the real reason they'd left so quickly. If I reported it before they boarded, everything would freeze. Tickets cancelled. Funds locked. Questions asked. So they'd rushed, pushed me into the house, kept me busy, counted on my silence until they were safely gone. They believed distance would protect them. They believed once the plane lifted, the window would close. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall, feeling something settle inside me. Not rage, not panic. Clarity. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd built their entire escape on the assumption that I wouldn't notice. That I wouldn't understand what I was looking at. That I'd choose peace over truth. What they didn't realize was that the moment they tied their future to my identity, they handed me the only leverage that mattered. And unlike them, I knew exactly when to use it. That night I didn't sleep much, but not because I was anxious. My mind was quiet, focused. The kind of calm that only comes when confusion disappears and purpose takes its place. I moved through the house silently, checking on the kids, locking doors, turning lights off, performing the role one last time. Then I sat down and started making calls. Not emotional calls. Not accusations. Just questions, carefully worded, neutral, unremarkable. I spoke to a fraud specialist first, explaining only what could be proven. No family drama. No context they didn't need. When she asked, "Did you authorize these charges?" I answered with one word. No. There was a pause. The kind that means someone is typing very fast. She explained the process slowly, professionally. How disputes worked. What happened when forged authorization was involved. What immediate actions could be taken, and which ones couldn't be undone. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. If you formally dispute this, she told me, the funds are frozen immediately. Frozen. Not later. Not eventually. Immediately. I thanked her and hung up. Next, I called the credit bureau to lock my file. Then a trusted friend. Someone who worked as a paralegal in family and financial cases. I didn't dramatize it. I laid out facts. She listened, quiet, and then said, "This is bigger than you think. Document everything. Do nothing impulsive." I already was. By midnight I had a checklist. Not revenge fantasies. Not speeches. Actions. Sequence. Timing. I knew which step triggered which response and how much distance I needed between each move to keep it clean. This wasn't about hurting them. It was about stopping them from hurting me again. In the kitchen, I poured a glass of water and stared at the refrigerator, still covered in vacation magnets and smiling photos. A family frozen in the moment before the fall. My phone buzzed again. My mom this time. You're being such a help. We're finally able to relax. Relax. They thought the danger was over because I was quiet. Because I hadn't confronted them. Because I'd always played the role they assigned me. They mistook silence for surrender. I typed back one word. Anytime. Then I placed my phone face down and opened my notes again. The plan wasn't dramatic. It didn't end in shouting or tears. It didn't rely on chance or coincidence. It relied on timing. Because the most effective revenge isn't loud. It's when the consequences arrive so cleanly, so legally, so inevitably, that the people who cause them have nowhere to argue, and no one else to blame. And when I finally closed my laptop, I knew something with absolute certainty. They were still celebrating. They had no idea the countdown had already started. The pressure started the next morning. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just enough to feel intentional. My mom called early, voice syrupy, careful. Sweetheart, she said, can you just text me that you're okay watching the kids this week? Just for our records. You know, if anyone asks. Anyone. I leaned against the counter and stared at the wall as she talked. The wording mattered. Everything they said now was about paper trails. About protection. About shaping the story before it was questioned. Sure, I said lightly. No problem. Her relief was immediate. Too immediate. Thank you, she breathed. You always understand. Minutes later, my brother followed up with a message. A quick thing. The rental company needs a copy of your ID. Just snap a pic. Shouldn't take a second. I read it twice. There it was. The squeeze. They weren't panicking yet, but they were adjusting. Trying to lock doors they suddenly realized were still open. Trying to collect proof that I was complicit, that I'd agreed, that I'd participated, that this was all perfectly normal. I didn't ignore them. Ignoring creates suspicion. Instead, I responded exactly the way they expected. I sent a photo, not of my ID, but of a folded piece of paper with my name printed clearly at the top. No numbers visible. No signature. Just enough to look cooperative if someone glanced at it quickly. Useless if anyone actually tried to use it. Then I sent the text my mom wanted. I'm fine watching the kids this week. No mention of agreement. No consent language. No acknowledgement of charges or trips or anything financial. She replied with a heart emoji. My brother sent a thumbs up. They thought they'd patched the leak. What they didn't realize was that every message they sent now worked against them. Every request proved awareness. Every attempt to secure proof showed motive. They were building my case for me, one anxious text at a time. That afternoon my mom called again, this time not as calm. Everything okay? She asked too quickly. Of course, I said. Why wouldn't it be? There was a pause. A recalculation. No reason, she said. Just checking. After we hung up, I stood very still in the living room, listening to the faint click of the camera adjusting its angle toward me. Toward the exit. They could feel control slipping even if they didn't understand why. Like holding water in cupped hands and realizing it was draining faster than expected. They weren't afraid yet. But they were no longer comfortable. And that was the first crack. Because once people start trying to protect themselves retroactively, it means they know, on some level, that something they did can't survive the light. They just don't know how close the light really is. They left the driveway just after sunrise. I watched from the window as the neighbor's sprinklers clicked on, mist rising in the cold air, the street quiet enough to hear the tires crunch over gravel. For a moment, everything looked normal. Peaceful. Like nothing irreversible was about to happen. Then the car turned the corner and disappeared. I didn't move right away. I waited until the house settled. Until the cameras stopped adjusting. Until the silence felt complete. Only then did I sit at the kitchen table, open my laptop and begin. The first call was the bank. My voice was calm. Clear. I gave my name, verified my identity, and said exactly what I had practiced saying the night before. I need to formally dispute several charges on my account. I did not authorize them. There was no drama on the other end. Just typing. Careful questions. Confirmation of dates and amounts. When the agent asked about the authorization form, I answered honestly. My signature was forged. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm initiating an immediate freeze, she said. This will stop all pending transactions connected to this dispute. I closed my eyes as she spoke. This was the moment. Once the freeze went through, there was no undoing it quietly. No smoothing things over. No pretending this was a misunderstanding. Whatever happened next would leave records. Trails. Consequences. I thanked her and hung up. Then I made the second set of calls, to the airline and the hotel. I didn't accuse. I didn't explain my family history. I simply said the payment method attached to the reservation was under active fraud investigation and could no longer be used. Policies kicked in immediately. Reservations flagged. Payments halted. Internal reviews triggered. By the time I closed my laptop, the house felt different. Lighter. As if something invisible had shifted its weight. My phone rang. My mom. I let it ring once. Twice. 3 times. Then my brother. I answered his call. What did you do? He hissed, panic leaking through his voice. My boarding pass just failed. I don't know, I said evenly. I'm at home with the kids. You froze something, he snapped. They're saying the payment's under investigation. There was the word they'd been so careful not to use around me. I didn't authorize any charges, I said. So I reported that. Silence. Then my mom came on the line, whispering urgently. Please, she said. There must be a mistake. We're about to board. I pictured the terminal. The line. The gate closing. There's no mistake, I said. And I can't fix it. I hung up before they could say anything else. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me the most. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched the quiet street like it was any other morning. Behind me, the house hummed with electricity and cameras and a plan that no longer worked. They had believed leaving meant escaping consequences. They had believed distance meant safety. What they were learning, far too late, was that once you build your future on someone else's identity, you don't get to decide when they take it back. And from that moment on, there was no going back. Only fallout. The messages started flooding in before noon. Not questions, accusations. My brother's texts came first. Fast. Fragmented. Angry. What did you tell them? This is insane. You're ruining everything. Then my mom switched tactics. Her voice messages were softer. Controlled. Almost trembling. We're stuck, she whispered. People are staring. This is humiliating. Please just undo whatever you did. Undo. As if it were a setting. As if I could flip a switch and return everything to the moment before consequences existed. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because something else happened. Something they hadn't planned for. My aunt called. She never called casually. She was the family archivist. The one who remembered dates, receipts, old stories people preferred forgotten. The one my mom always kept informed, just in case. I got a strange call this morning, she said slowly. Your mother asked me to talk to you. To reason with you. I exhaled. So she told you, I said. She told me you were confused, my aunt replied. That you misunderstood something financial. I opened my folder and glanced at the screenshots waiting inside it. I can forward you what I have, I said. There was a pause. Then, please do. I sent everything. The forged authorization. The charges. The handwritten note. The credit inquiry. The texts asking for proof after the fact. Minutes passed. When my aunt finally spoke again, her voice was different. Quieter. Sharper. We're having dinner tonight, she said. Everyone will be there. Everyone. You should come, she added. Bring everything. By late afternoon, the tone of the messages changed. My brother stopped yelling and started bargaining. Let's just talk privately. My mom stopped pleading and started panicking. This doesn't need to involve other people. That's how I knew it was working. They weren't afraid of me. They were afraid of witnesses. At dinner, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't interrupt. I waited until they finished explaining their version, carefully edited, full of half-truths. Then I laid the documents on the table. One by one. No commentary. Just dates. Names. Proof. The room went silent. My brother reached for the papers, face flushed, and my aunt snapped, "Don't." My mom tried to laugh. "This is out of context." "Then explain the context," my aunt said calmly. "All of it." They couldn't. Because lies survive best in private. Once exposed to daylight, once repeated out loud with receipts, they collapse under their own weight. I sat back and watched it happen. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was something worse. This was the moment they realized the story no longer belonged to them. The silence at the table didn't break all at once. It fractured. My brother spoke first, voice too loud, too fast. "This is being blown out of proportion," he said, laughing in short bursts. "She's twisting things. You know how she gets." My aunt didn't look at him. She looked at the papers. My mom reached for her water glass, missed it, then tried again. "We never forced anything," she said. "She offered to help. She always does." I finally spoke. Not to defend myself. To clarify a detail. "I was asked to come home 3 days before you left," I said. "The charges were placed the day after I arrived." The room went quiet again, deeper this time. "That's coincidence," my brother snapped. I slid my phone across the table. The credit inquiry notification glowed on the screen. Time stamped. Dated. Unarguable. "Then explain this," my aunt said, still calm. "Explain why her identity was required for your bookings. Explain the forged authorization." My mom's face changed. Not guilt. Calculation. He turned to me. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "Do you want to destroy this family?" I met her eyes. "You already did. I just stopped pretending." My brother stood up so suddenly his chair scraped across the floor. "This is insane," he shouted. "I didn't forge anything. You did this to yourself." He reached for the folder. My aunt's hand came down hard on the table. "Sit down." He froze. "I forwarded copies to myself," she continued. "And to a lawyer friend. You don't get to make this disappear by grabbing paper." His confidence cracked then. The bravado drained out of him like air from a punctured tire. "Mom," he said, turning to her. "Say something." He didn't. For the first time, my mom had no version of the story left that worked. No angle that didn't implicate her. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "We just needed it to go through," she whispered. "Just once." That was the moment everything collapsed. Not because she confessed, but because she explained. Because explanations admit intent. My aunt leaned back, expression unreadable. "You used your daughter's identity to fund a trip and a financial move," she said slowly. "And you trapped her in your house to keep her quiet." No one argued. My brother sank back into his chair, head in his hands. His phone buzzed on the table, again and again. Missed calls. Messages. Consequences spreading outward faster than he could stop them. I watched them unravel without raising my voice. This wasn't a confrontation. It was an implosion. When lies collide with proof, they don't explode dramatically. They fold in on themselves. And in that room, surrounded by witnesses, the people who had always controlled the narrative finally ran out of words. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, through phones buzzing face down on the table, through conversations that stopped when someone entered the room, through the way people suddenly avoided eye contact with my mom. My brother's phone was the loudest. Calls he didn't answer. Messages he read but couldn't respond to. At one point he whispered, "This can't be happening," over and over, like repetition might undo reality. My aunt stood up first. "I think everyone needs space," she said. "This isn't something we resolve tonight." No one disagreed. My mom tried one last time as people gathered their coats. "We're family," she said, voice breaking now. "We can fix this privately." Privately. That word had protected her for decades. But no one followed her into the kitchen. No one stayed behind to comfort her. The room emptied in silence, leaving her standing alone at the table with the papers she'd hoped no one would ever see. Over the next days, the consequences spread outward like cracks in glass. The bank investigation moved forward. My brother's clearing funds froze completely, tangled in questions he couldn't answer without incriminating himself. His business partner stopped returning calls. Then his spouse did. The trip photos disappeared from social media. Then entire accounts went dark. Family members stopped calling me, not out of anger but confusion. The story they'd believed no longer made sense. And once doubt enters, loyalty gets quiet. My mom tried reaching me every night. Sometimes angry. Sometimes sobbing. Sometimes bargaining. He promised therapy. Apologies. Change. I didn't answer. Because this wasn't about forgiveness. It was about endings. One afternoon my brother showed up at the house unexpectedly. He looked smaller. Older. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He just stood in the doorway and said, "You didn't have to ruin everything." I met his gaze. "I didn't," I said. "I stopped letting you ruin me." He had no reply. By the end of the week, the family dynamic I'd grown up under no longer existed. Not repaired. Not healed. Exposed. And exposure does something powerful. It strips people of the version of themselves they perform for others. It forces them to sit with who they actually are, without an audience, without control. My mom texted one final message. "What do you want now?" I stared at it for a long time before answering. Nothing, I typed. That's the point. And for the first time in my life, the silence that followed didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. I left early the next morning. Not in a rush. Not in secret. I packed slowly, deliberately, folding clothes the way I always had when I knew I wasn't coming back. The kids watched from the hallway, quiet, sensing something had shifted even if they didn't understand what. I knelt down and hugged each of them goodbye. Not dramatically. Just enough to be real. Enough to let them know this wasn't their fault. "Are you coming back?" one of them asked. I smiled softly. "No," I said. "But you'll be okay." Outside the air was cold and clean. The kind of cold that wakes you up instead of weighing you down. I put my bag in the car and stood there for a moment, just breathing, listening to a house that no longer owned me. Before driving away, I made the last calls. I confirmed the credit freeze. Closed every access point they'd ever had. Changed numbers. Updated addresses. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn anyone. Systems don't need explanations, only boundaries. My phone buzzed as I pulled onto the road. My mom. I didn't answer. Another message came through, then another. Finally, one that was shorter. Quieter. "Please, we're family." I pulled over, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to answer clearly once without emotion clouding the words. I typed slowly. "You were never my family." I paused, then added one more sentence. "You were just my first scam." I sent it and blocked the number. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and open, like it had been waiting. No music. No rush. Just movement. Just distance. I thought about how much effort I'd spent my life trying to earn fairness from people who profited from denying it. How I'd mistaken endurance for strength. Silence for peace. I understood something now that I hadn't before. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like exit. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do to people who used you is remove yourself so completely that there's nothing left to take, manipulate, or rewrite. They would tell their version of this story, of course. People like them always do. But it wouldn't matter anymore. Because for the first time, the story I was living didn't include them at all. And that was the ending they never saw coming.